Saturday, April 13th at 7 at the Pequot Lakes High School Theater. Closed captioning for Lakeland Currents is supported by the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Telecommunications Access Minnesota, and Nisswa Tax Service. Nisswa Tax Service, tax preparation for businesses and individuals. Across from City Hall in Nisswa and online at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where tonight we're talking again about tick disease. It's something that we covered a couple of years ago, but unfortunately this problem is expanding. It's not getting smaller, and it's also maybe getting more controversial. We're not necessarily here tonight to talk about all the controversies around it, but we do need to talk a little bit about the different kinds of diseases that are caused by ticks. There's 4 or 5 major ticks in our area. It's not just a wood tick is what most of us probably think of. And so tonight, if we can just help a few people understand how to prevent this problem, or if they've been feeling some of the ways that some of our victims here tonight have felt, and maybe we can help you understand how to work through that. My guests this evening are Dr. Arden Beachy, who is from the Lakewood Health System, and the Anchor Hospital there is in Staples, and they have a number of clinics in the surrounding areas. And to his right is Jamie Carlson, who is a victim. She has had Lyme disease. And to her right is Lori Bach, who is a victim also, and Lori is also a registered nurse. So she has a perspective of both being a victim and also being a professional person that has had this. As I said, this has caused a lot of controversy, and the controversy is, for the most part, in how to diagnose and treat this. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on the controversial part because it's not something that everybody agrees on. So we're here mostly to talk about how you can identify if you've got this particular disease or one of these diseases, and then what should be done after that. Arden, maybe you could kick us off with a little bit about where is this found in Minnesota? What's the distribution here? Why is this becoming a bigger problem now?
I think the biggest reason, well, first of all, we can bring up a slide we have here, if we could pull that up, please.
This is a distribution in red.
Yeah, and as you can see, I mean, we're sitting here in Crow Wing County, which is right in the part of that distribution. But it also extends into Wadena County, Todd County, Morrison County, Cass County, and even Mille Lacs County. And so this is a slide from 2008, so it's probably even more expansive now. I think one of the biggest things, and epidemiologists will, some of them do agree with this theory of dilution, where you have urban sprawl. A lot of people are building into forested areas, and a lot of those lots are 1 to 5 acres. And so what you have is a lot of smaller rodents and mammals that are allowed to, proliferate, or they stay real hardy because some of the bigger species that prey on them have to find new forests to mate and to live. And so that's allowed these ticks, which rabbits and these white-footed mouse and raccoons are some of the vectors that they are on, and so they've been allowed to kind of proliferate. And and for that, you've seen the incidence in tick-borne illness rise.
A tick, when it's born, as I understand it, does not have the disease. They have to have a blood meal from a carrier to actually get it. So the ticks are as innocent as we are when they're very, very young. But after they have that blood meal from, it could be a dog, a cat, a bear. It could be, if you've got pet bears, you might want to think about getting rid of them. And I think so many people are surprised that there are so many people in the metropolitan areas that are getting this who don't have animals.
And so we also have another slide, if we can bring that up, of the ticks themselves, or the ones we're talking about for Lyme disease. And as you can see on the far right is the larva form. And what happens is that the adult ticks, the females on the far left, it's black with a red belly, and then the male's second from the left. The female lays the eggs or the larvae in the spring, and these larvae are looking for a vector or a host to attach to and get their first blood meal. Now, when they explain the life cycle, it can be a lot of different mammals, but the main one is a white-footed mouse. And so if that mouse has Borrelia burgdorferi, the spirochete that causes Lyme, it'll be ingested by the larva, and then that larva will go through to the fall, and over the winter it'll molt, and it'll come out a nymph, which is the common form of the black-legged tick, which causes Lyme disease, or which Lyme disease is spread from most often. And so they'll molt to the nymph form, and then the nymph form on its second or third meal is usually able to spread the disease if it has it. And so that's when we're not the actual host it's looking for, but we've expanded ourselves, so to speak, into their area. And so the nymph will attach to a deer or another mammal, or in our case, in the case of us, a human, and that's where they'll attach, and within 10 to 2 hours, will attach to human and get a blood meal. And if they're infected with Borrelia burgdorferi, the spirochete, that's where they transmit it to us.
Now, not all ticks carry the disease or a disease either, do they?
No, they don't all carry disease, and so in that larval state, if they were never exposed to a mammal that was infected with Borrelia, then that tick might go through its life cycle, and the adult may never have the disease. So, as you saw on that slide, the female, which does engorge when it has a blood meal, if it can transmit the disease too if it was infected with the disease back in the earlier stages. If it wasn't, it'll take a blood meal and then die. The male never engorges. They're found on us, and a lot of people have had a tick bite from them, but it doesn't engorge and it doesn't pass on the illness.
What are some of the other major diseases that we do get from ticks?
Well, there's a lot of different ticks. It depends what part of the country you live in, but the main ones that come from the black-legged tick, which is a carrier of these vector-borne tick-borne illnesses, is what you get is babesia, human anaplasmosis, or sometimes referred to as ehrlichiosis. There is a little bit of difference, but it's human anaplasmosis, the Lyme disease, and then a newer one, Bartonella, and then the last one that's not as common. Some people have heard of it, is the Powassan virus. And the problem with all those is they all have a lot of the same symptoms: fever, muscle aches. Lyme's really the one that has joint aches, but it can be perceived as joint aches, nausea, in certain cases vomiting. When you have like babesia, you get a lot of profuse sweating, and so it's hard to tell exactly which one of those diseases. In some cases, you have more than one that you're really dealing with, and that's what makes part of the treatment hard.
I can imagine in a way, it's probably petrifying to the medical community. We don't have a vaccination for these kinds of illnesses. There's so many things that they can look like it could be something else, and it's hard to diagnose because there are so many complicated. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, you could probably think you have Lyme disease, and that's part of the controversy too, isn't it, in the medical community, is how do you really diagnose? I think everybody agrees that the quicker you diagnose and the quicker you treat, the less damage will be done to the person, and the longer it takes to find out what the problem is and the longer it takes to treat, the more serious the complications are. Is that a fair statement?
For the most part, that bears out. Not always, but for the most part, the delay in treatment adds in my perspective, a lot of things. It adds in extra costs. It adds in tests that end up being done that didn't need to be, which can the population as a whole increases in medical expenses as well as to the individual. itself, and it can be real frustrating because it can take a while to get to the diagnosis. Once you get the diagnosis, a lot of them find out that, yeah, if I would have been diagnosed sooner, I might have not have had this as long, might not have had to put up with so many of the symptoms, and leads to lost work days, a lot of different things. And so it's kind of a snowball effect, and that's what makes it frustrating with the patients that are trying to get help.
What I've read is this is a common problem for hospitals. It's not unique to any one particular hospital. And I've read that there's a real explosion of Lyme in Wales, Australia, and parts of England are experiencing this real serious growth too. And we might add that even though we didn't see Lyme disease in Baudette, that doesn't mean that it isn't there. It may just have not been reported at this particular data, part of the data that was collected. But I think, what do you see as probably the biggest controversy? I'm not asking you to get into the controversy, but when we hear that there's controversy about the treatments, what are some of those controversial issues?
Some of the controversies are, one big one is, do you just go by the blood test? There's the ELISA test, which is kind of a screening antibody test, and then the main one all of us providers use is the Western blot, which tries to pick up the antibodies that our body is making to the spirochete, that is Borrelia burgdorferi. And so they're good tests. To me, they're not great tests. And so how you interpret them is can differ, and that differing can lead to delayed treatment, and that's where people get frustrated. Also, most people that read about this think of the bullseye rash, the erythema migrans that the tick bite makes. Well, that's usually in 65 to 75, some cases 80% of the people, but that's not everyone. And so if you're looking for that, or sometimes the patients have been frustrated because they've been asked, did you have the rash? And maybe they did, but they couldn't see it. It was on their back, in their hair, in their groin, so they didn't notice it. Or they didn't have it at all, and so then they just get excluded even though they still had the disease. And so that's kind of been one that's a controversy of, do you need that or do you not? And we know that everyone doesn't get it. And the other thing is, even people that do get it, it's not always a bullseye rash. Mm-hmm. And so you could have a rash on your hand and not know it was a tick bite and think, oh, it's just a rash. Mm-hmm. And in retrospect, with some of the patients I've treated, you figure out, well, they probably did have the rash, but it didn't. They were looking for the bullseye rash, which is always talked about, and so they didn't think anything of it.
Jamie, you ran into your problem in the spring, wasn't it, or April or March or April?
May.
In May. Mm-hmm. And what kind of symptoms did you have to start out with before you really knew? You didn't really know what you had, did you?
No, and I was pregnant at the time, so a lot of my symptoms, I was 8 months pregnant, and so a lot of my symptoms were just brushed off as, you're pregnant, it's, getting into the summer, you're busy, you have 2 little boys you're looking after. But when I look back, my symptoms were very classic. I had I remember a couple weeks after getting it, I just would feel tired all the time every night. I almost feverish. I'd tell my husband, gosh, I feel like I have a fever. And I would take it, and it would be like 99, 100, just a low grade. But it was never enough to really keep me down. It would always just be kind of just there. Then, before I had Max, it was a week before July 1st, I got a really bad headache, like the worst headache I've ever had. And nothing touched it. I mean, I took everything from, Tylenol, ibuprofen, Vicodin. It just wasn't a normal headache. And I remember telling the doctors, this isn't normal. And again, you're pregnant. It's, summer. You're stressed out, whatever. So eventually it did go away. My next symptom, I had big circle rashes all over my stomach. And I remember showing my husband, and
this is how far down?
I was into a month, it was a week before I had him, so the end of June. So yeah, it had been over a month. But again, I was pregnant. I remember showing the nurses, oh, you're pregnant. But they were just bullseyes all over my stomach. And then after I had Max.
Was that from the Lyme?
Mm-hmm.
It was?
Yeah, yep, and that, I guess.
I didn't realize you could have more than one.
Yeah, there are cases where you can have more than one, and in one of the reports, physician stated his high number was 50.
Oh, really?
And so
50 different...
50 different bullseyes.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a lot, and I remember.
And another thing that happened, I'll let Jamie keep going on, but another thing you'll see sometimes is when you do treat them, the bullseye rash will keep popping up. And it can be one or it can be several.
Yeah, I would put cream on it. And, but, I mean, it was classic. Then after I had Max July 1st, it was like I got jaw pain. Like I couldn't even open my mouth. I thought, oh, I have TMJ or something. My neck began to hurt really bad, like the next couple days. Like I couldn't even bend it. Shoved it off to I'm nursing a baby, always looking down. Then I began the joint pain, especially at night. It was so, I couldn't even pick up my baby who was 6 pounds. I mean, it was like I all of a sudden had these hands that didn't work. They just jumped from joint to joint. It was so bad at one point I couldn't even like squeeze toothpaste or open up a milk lid. I mean, it was just, I went to my knees. Every night it was just a different joint. And so then I had called the hospital and had told them, and she ran some blood tests, and they came back positive for an ANA, which is an autoimmune marker. So they instantly kind of went down that route. I didn't get tested for Lyme at that time. My joint pain was so bad, they had recommended taking prednisone, and I didn't want to because I was nursing, and I really wanted to stay away from that. But it got so bad at one point where every joint in my body it felt like knives or just like trying to poke out. It was awful. And so I did end up taking it, and it didn't really, my fingers and like elbows got better, but then it went to my spine, my back, my hips, my, like the bigger joints where I couldn't even walk. There were times when I had looked like a 9-year-old woman trying to get up my stairs. And
you still didn't have it diagnosed yet?
No. So we're into the end of July, August now. So they referred me then to a rheumatologist, and she then checked me for Lyme. And I got those test results back the end of August, and they came back positive. And I remember when they called to tell me the results, because in my mind, they convinced me that I had,
something
rheumatoid.
Else.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at my 3 boys thinking, wow, this is my life, and I just thought it was over. And
So Lyme disease was almost good news.
It was. I remember them telling me, and I was thrilled. I was so happy. I remember calling everyone, I have Lyme disease. That's what's wrong with me. I mean, it was just like, oh, and I remember my mother-in-law, who was a home health care nurse, she just said, oh, Jamie, you don't want Lyme. Because she had seen people. She does, visits and does their IVs and stuff, and she's seen it firsthand how sick you can get with it. And I had no idea. I mean, I really didn't know that. I just thought I was going to take medicine and get better. And that was further from the case.
And it actually got to the point where you were somewhat depressed from it, weren't you?
Well, I think once I started getting treated, then I just assumed that it was going to be this quick fix, and it wasn't. If anything, I tried to when I saw Dr. Beachy, he said, you need to hit this hard. You don't want to, this is, again, told me the seriousness of it. I was nursing. I wanted to keep nursing. I just was kind of naive to the whole disease, and so I did the not as aggressive approach right away, and I just didn't see any improvement. So then we went on more of a heavier dose, and he told me, he said, you're going to get sicker, a lot sicker, and I was like, okay, whatever. I didn't really think anything of it until, I got much, much, much sicker. I mean,
wow.
It was, everything
How
was
long
just,
did it take before you started feeling better?
It was a good, I'd say like 3 months. I mean, I was hospitalized for a week because I got really, complete lameness where I couldn't walk anymore. Like, it felt like, I was explained, like, you have sand in your hands. Like, I would try to fold laundry, and it would just, like, I couldn't. I remember one time trying to drive to Duluth, and I had to pull over because I couldn't hang on to the steering wheel anymore. It was just, walking was hard. I mean, it just feels like you have cold. Really scary. I mean, it was awful. And mentally, it was just draining. I remember just looking at my kids and just thinking, what good a mom am I if I'm just going to be sick like this? Like, it's not. And then you would get just a little glimpse of, like, a good day, even if it was, like, a couple hours. And it was like, oh, you forgot how good it was to feel good, and then it would just hit you like, no, you're not better. And that, to me, it just crushed me. I just, remember not even, it was very depressing. And I was so thankful to have a husband and a family. They were just so supportive, and, I mean, every day my husband, I remember asking him one time, do you think I'm just dying inside? I feel like I'm slowly dying, and he, calmly said, no, it just feels that way, and you will get better. And that's what you need to hear when you're in that state. I mean, I can't say that enough to people who have it now and are dealing with the treatment is you will get better. It just takes a really long time.
Lori, what's your story?
Well, my story started about October of last year, and I've had a history of 5+ years of a diagnosis with an autoimmune disorder, lupus. And so I've had various symptoms, joint pain, swelling, rashes for years, and I just kind of learned how to deal with them. And then in the fall, I went to my physician and I just said, something's not right. I hurt everywhere. I have absolutely no energy. Some days I felt like my brains were scrambled, and that is not me. I just knew something was not right. And so we did the, lupus testing, which is the ANA testing and antigen antibody testing, and she decided to do a Lyme test at the same time. And as long as I was there, I had the mammogram and all that other good stuff. And she called me back and she said, hey, everything looks great. And I said, well, good, but I'm not feeling good. What about the Lyme test? And she said, oh my gosh, let me look. And she hadn't gotten it to her computer yet. And so she said, I'm going to look into it, I'll call you back. And she called me back not that much later and she said, Lori, it's positive. And I was like, whoa, so now what? So I started with the conventional treatment. Did the first-line drugs and did that for almost 2 weeks, a little bit over 2 weeks, and I still wasn't feeling better. In fact, I was feeling worse. And how I was feeling was just absolute, complete fatigue. I work full-time. I had days where I couldn't get up. My legs hurt, my knees hurt. I've always had problems with my feet, but it just got progressively more intense. And then I went on another antibiotic after that first cycle, and I was on that for over 30 days. And things just didn't seem right. And so then I thought, okay, it's all in my head. So I'm just going to stop, because the literature shows, and of course I'm a nurse, so I did a lot of reading and did a lot of internet searches and read everything I could find about it. And I thought, well, I should be better. So I'm just going to talk myself into being better. And that didn't work. So then I went to Dr. Beachy and I just sat down in his office one day and I said, you know me. And this isn't right. And he said, well, here's what we got to do. We got to go at this with big guns. And so I said, okay, I'm ready. Tell me what I got to do. And so I proceeded to have a PICC line inserted, which is a central line that goes in your arm and goes up into the veins up in your chest area. And subsequently got then IV antibiotics. And after 7 days of that...
were you hospitalized for that?
No, I was not.
Okay.
No. And after 7 days of that, I had what they call a HERXA reaction. And I decided that I was either going to pull that line out, because I was just so agitated and everything just seemed to be overwhelming. And that was not like me. And so I said, no, I can't do this. It's too much. And Dr. Beachy was good, and he still listened to what I had to say. And So subsequently, I went on multiple antibiotic therapy. I'm better. I'm still being treated. And I think I didn't have a lot of the classic, I didn't have the bullseye rash. I didn't have the classic symptoms because I had this underlying disease that I was dealing with. But I think the biggest thing is that you got to surround yourself with people who will listen and will support you and give you the encouragement that you need, because some days are absolutely, you can't do a thing. And there are still good days and there are some bad days. But overall, you do get better. And, that's the one thing that Dr. Beachy told me when I went to see him is he said, you will get better. And I said, okay, I got your word on that. And it's true, but it's like peeling an onion. That's some of the descriptions that they give. One layer at a time. Sometimes your eyes are burning out, but you got to keep peeling away the layers. And
so you're both on the road to recovery, but you're not
absolutely.
Either one of you 100% yet, are you?
No. I mean, there are days when I feel great, and there are days when it's like, ugh. Wow. But it's like I don't want to acknowledge it. My husband always says that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're
down to our last minute, but Dr. Beachy, what's the prognosis for people like these ladies? Is it in another year they probably will feel normal?
Yeah, it's always tough to say, but the thing I try to tell my patients is that, you got to have a positive attitude. You got to keep exercising. You got to get good sleep, preferably be on a low carbohydrate diet. And you gotta keep a positive attitude. You can't get this "oh poor me" attitude. And most they might not get 100%. Some do, some don't. But from where they were at, it's drastically better. And hopefully you can get them 85, 90%.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for coming here and sharing your story. Personalize this a little bit. I think it helps everybody understand what it can be like to have this disease. It's really not a very good experience. But there is hope if you do get that. Dr. Beachy, I'd like to thank you for coming and sharing your knowledge on this. And as we said before, if this will help just a few people understand how serious this disease is and also how important it is to check yourself every day or have someone check you, just very important. You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.
Programming on Lakeland Public Television is brought to you in part by Brainerd Lakes Marketplace, celebrating the Day of the Young Child on Saturday, April 14th at the Brainerd Area Civic Center. Games, clowns, prizes, and more. BrainerdLakesMarketplace.com. Coca-Cola Bottling of Bemidji, supporting healthy, educational, recreational, and asset-building opportunities for families in the Northland. Minnesota Gold Telephone Directory, the official directory for Paul Bunyan Communications, available in over 52 communities and online at mngold.com. The North Itasca Electric Cooperative encourages you to watch the Lakeland News Update and encourages its members to use all the energy they need, but to be sure they need all the energy they use. North Itasca Electric Cooperative, owned by those it serves. The Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe is pleased to be a sponsor of Lakeland News on Lakeland Public Television. You can learn more about the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe on the web at